Hey guys, it's Sebastian from AskSebby, and today we're going to look at whether credit is only for poor people. Before we dive in, a big favor is to give this a thumbs up. It doesn't really cost you too much, and also if you really like the channel, consider subscribing. So one reason I wanted to talk about this is because I have had a few people message me about this, but also in the comments of some videos. Brian Evans wrote a pretty interesting little bit, and it looks like it's in good faith, so we'll go through these point by point. The funny thing is that I do agree with some of them. Number 1, chasing credit is a poor man's game. My interpretation of this is that credit is primarily used by lower income people, and then higher income people don't use credit because it doesn't make sense. We'll look at this from 3 different perspectives: normal income ranges, higher income ranges that are pretty aggressive, and then we'll look at some billionaires. For the normal income ranges, we're going to look at a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. One interesting thing is that credit usage is extremely low when your income is low. Looking at the data, if you're someone who makes less than $25,000 in household income, then your credit usage is only going to be 5%. As your income increases to that $25,000 to $50,000 range though, credit usage increases by 3x to 15%. You can see this increase as your income increases to about 37% for the $100,000 to $200,000 range. On the far right, we can see that credit card usage as a preference spikes to 66%. A big part of this has to do with access to credit, just because the lower your income, the harder it is to get credit and to even get a lot of bank products. On the flip side, if you look at something like cash, you can see it decreasing substantially from 55% all the way to 10%. Debit cards are pretty interesting because for super low income, they're considered the unbanked, and once you move on to the far right, it drops substantially again. You're looking at about 15%. The funny thing is, you would think that the higher the income you have, the less likely you are to use credit. But the thing is, people in that income band are using credit a bit differently. This message, along with a lot of other similar ones, tend to be on American Express Platinum videos. The funny thing there is that technically with that card, you're supposed to pay it in full every single month, meaning that you're not really accruing debt, you're not really paying interest, you're supposed to pay it off in full. For these type of cards, banks aren't really making money based off interest, they're going after swipe fees. So if we dive into American Express's 2019 annual report, we can see that they made $26 billion on discount revenue. This is going to be the swipe fees. In contrast, they only made $12 billion, so less than half, from interest income. If this is what they make from swipes, then they're only making about this much from interest. This actually leads into the next part, where there's analysis and a belief that credit cards and credit card rewards make rich people richer and poor people poorer. The Federal Bank of Boston released a study in 2010 that looked at credit card rewards and how it added to income inequality. This is a really good paper, and I would strongly recommend reading through it, or at least skimming it, because there's a lot of data here. The takeaway of it though is that credit card rewards transfer wealth from the poor to the rich. If you think of a store like Trader Joe's, they're going to charge you the same amount for an apple whether you're paying with cash, debit, or credit. In order to take credit cards, they end up paying that extra 2 or 3% for these transactions to places like American Express. Trader Joe's isn't stupid though. They're not going to take a hit for no reason, and they can't charge the person using credit cards specifically, so instead they're going to raise the prices for all of their items by, let's say, 2%. This effectively means if you have a credit card, it's pretty much going shopping with a coupon every time. I'm using a credit card to get rewards, Trader Joe's has to pay more to accept my credit card, they raise prices for everything, and they're charging you, and equally me, the same amount. So effectively, you're paying me to use a credit card. The second argument is that this is good income, but it's not rich. 200K, 300K, 500K household income is good, but it's not really crazy if you live in a place like San Francisco. If we move into the Graham Stephan level, who makes about $100,000 to $200,000 every single month, he still uses credit cards, and I feel like there's a lot of people in that space who actively use cards. I think it does depend on how you made your money though, so if you're someone who didn't really need credit in order to do what they did, then maybe it doesn't matter, but for him and for a lot of other people, it's a very valuable tool. In this demographic, there's a bunch of other cards that are specifically targeted for them. So for something like the JP Morgan Palladium card, technically you have to have a private banking relationship, so you need to have $10 million with Chase. If people didn't want to use that card, if it was not something that was actively used, then Chase wouldn't bother having a team managing it, and they wouldn't bother marketing it or telling anyone about it, because if no one signed up, they wouldn't care. If people in this demographic didn't want it, then they wouldn't make it. Moving into that top level, I think it really depends on how they made their money and their experience of credit cards. Mark Cuban, for example, really doesn't like credit cards because for the average person, especially the person who's not paying off their cards in full, it's going to lead into a debt cycle. Does that mean that billionaires don't use credit cards because they have so much money? Not really, because there's been examples of people buying $1 million worth of paintings. So there's a billionaire that put a $170 million painting on his Centurion card just to get the points. So why would he do this instead of just wiring the money and not having to deal with a credit card? So one primary reason is because he might not be that liquid. A lot of people at that net worth oftentimes have it in ownership of their company. By putting it on a credit card, it gives him time to sell different assets if he needs to. And then the second reason is, why not? He's making the auction house pay for his points. American Express still gets their cut, let's say 3%, but the auction house is the one footing the bill for his points. If anything, I think usage of credit cards is more dependent on your experience with them and whether you want to leave money on the table rather than your net worth or your income. On that note, if you're someone looking to learn about cards, a very easy way to support the channel would be to use the links that are on our website, AskSebby.com, or the ones down below in the description box. Make sure the links are competitive with other ones you can find online, but otherwise it's a very easy way to support the channel. Number 2, get your money up and not your debt. This one's a bit tough because I think it depends on the trajectory that you're on and also your situation. When I was doing my first startup on the East Coast in the Boston area, my burn rate per month was $500. This means that $100 in cash back for spending $500, that $100 would have bought me an extra week. That was a point where I was sleeping in the office and pretty much going to startup events in order to get free food. For me though, I knew there was a path and it was part of the journey, so it wasn't really great, but it was something that needed to be done. On the flip side though, I think if you're someone who feels like they're underemployed and you're not really getting the opportunities that you want and it's not really going the way you want it to go, then I strongly agree that focusing on credit cards doesn't move the needle compared to improving your job prospects. Something I've talked about in prior videos is learning how to code, learning how to do other things that tangibly maybe 2 to 5x your income. If you're someone who wants to learn how to code, I would look into something like Lambda School, and I would follow their CEO on Twitter just because I think it's a very good insight. If you don't want to do a program like that, I would look into Free Code Camp or a lot of the other free solutions online. If coding isn't for you and you're more about marketing, then I would look into something like Acadium, which has a similar program but targeted towards marketers. And if you're more of a sales guy, I would look into FlockJ, which is pretty much the same model as well. I'm not invested or an advisor or anything in these companies, and also I don't have referral links down below, but I just think they're good programs that are worth considering because if you're someone who's not happy with their situation, then improving those skills and getting new ones is probably the best way out of it. If you need to drive for Uber in order to put food on the table, that makes a lot of sense, but with that other time, level up your skills. On the flip side, I think if you're someone in corporate and you have a fixed trajectory, then there's not really much else you can do on the side. So let's say you're doing your CPA, you're doing Big Four accounting for tax or audit, or you're doing investment banking, you're 2-year stint before you go into your MBA or something, or go into private equity, or maybe you're doing consulting. If you're on a path, it's really hard to do something else on the side. For a lot of these jobs, you might already make a lot of money, and for something like consulting, I would argue that understanding credit card rewards probably is a good way to connect with your coworkers and also to maximize the value of the spend that you already have. 3.1. There's nothing a credit card can do that a debit card can't. The most competitive credit card gets you 1% back on up to $3,000 of spend every single month. If you're someone on Team Cashback, you could easily double this with something like the Double Cash card or the PayPal MasterCard. If you want to do a bit more work, you could easily get something like 5% for the same exact spend. If you're on Team Travel though, this is where it gets really interesting because it's really hard to replicate any of this with debit cards. If you end up getting something like the Hilton Aspire card by American Express, you end up getting an anniversary night just by having that card. So you're paying $450, but you're getting $250 in travel incidental credit and then $250 towards the hotel. But even if you ignore that, you can get that night and you can redeem it somewhere that's otherwise very expensive. So for example, last year, Mandy and I ended up going to the Maldives to the Waldorf Astoria. We have a bunch of Aspire cards and we ended up using that for one of the nights that typically retail for $2,500. So just by having that card and paying an annual fee, I ended up using it towards somewhere that would be substantially more expensive otherwise. And if you talk to a lot of other people there, yes, there's a bunch of points people, but there's a lot of people paying that rack rate. You still have to pay for the trip because there's other expenses, but it turns something like a $15,000 trip into a $2,000 trip. If you know of a debit card that can do that for me, then I'll happily sign up for 10 of them. I also have 4 Better Balance Rewards cards that get me $120 per card every year just by automatically reloading to my Amazon account. So this is something that I don't actively need to do. It does it by itself every single year. 3.2, nothing a credit card can do that a debit card can't, besides getting you into debt. The 2 examples I gave for myself don't really require you to spend money on the cards, so I don't really know how that would encourage me to spend more money or to get me into debt because I'm paying $450 for those perks. Same thing with the Amazon allowance for the Better Balance Rewards card. I'm getting that anyways. I'm not increasing the allowance I'm giving to myself because that doesn't really make any sense. For Team Cashback, this does get a bit dangerous, so you do want to make sure that you're not overspending just to get more cash back. But for travel, I feel like there's a lot of ways to maximize it without getting into trouble. So for example, if you live somewhere like the Bay Area where the average rent per month is about $3,600, that's pretty much one minimum spend every single month. I have to pay that rent anyways. I'm not going to increase my rent for fun. For the last 2 or 3 years for the duration of this channel, I've pretty much been adding a new credit card every 2 months, and then Mandy ends up swapping off kind of for those other subsequent months. Yes, there's annual fees and there's cost to doing this, but you're not going to do it unless you're getting value. I get the idea that some people end up going crazy if they have a credit card and they rush to the LV store, but I don't really think that's most people. Or at least most people here are probably pretty responsible. You know you need to pay that off, so you're not going to accrue debt. Number 4, you're getting a measly few $100s in points every year. I think that depends on how you're going to use your cards and your spending, just because you can end up getting outsized value. So for example, if I sign up for a Citi American Airlines card, that can get me Etihad first class. So I'm paying my rent anyways because I need to do that, but with that intro bonus, that gets me an experience that would otherwise cost maybe $4,000 to $14,000 or $20,000, depending on who you ask and also when you look. After the first year, if you don't like that card, there's a no annual fee downgrade path to the Citi Double Cash card, so you have that cash back path in the future if you want to do that. I don't make as much as my friends who work in bigger tech companies or people who are founders of venture-backed startups who are worth a few million, but still, they don't really like to pay full price. And again, I'm pretty biased because the people I know are likely going to be cheaper, but they're typically deal seeking. They don't mind paying for economy. $500 to $1,000, that's within reason, but when you go past that $2,000, $4,000, $5,000 range, it gets a bit more aggressive and people aren't as comfortable paying. The other part of it is that total comp, if you work at a private company, you don't really have as much cash on hand. So let's say you go somewhere like ByteDance, which is TikTok out of school, total comp is $232K, but you're only getting $180K in cash. Even if you move to the next level, you're getting $440 total comp, but a lot of that's going to be RSUs. This pretty much means that you can't see a lot of this value until it IPOs or until there's an exit event. Number 5, it isn't worth the hassle and the risk. In terms of risk, I would argue that credit cards are less risky than debit cards given the protections out there, and that's pretty much a whole nother video. And in terms of hassle, I do agree. I think if you're someone who doesn't enjoy doing it, enjoy looking at these numbers and analyzing stuff like this, then it doesn't make sense. One of the reasons I like doing this is because it's one of the more productive ways of me wasting my time. Before I did the whole credit card thing, I would do a lot of basketball stuff where I would analyze data. So I'm doing that anyways, but unless I do sports betting, then analyzing that NBA data doesn't really do anything. On the flip side, I can be watching Netflix and I can look for bank account signups or credit card signups and then get value just by pretty much entering information and clicking a button. If you have something better to do with your time, then I think that makes a lot of sense. Go focus on that because that's going to be higher expected value. But for a lot of people, you probably take breaks anyways, and this doesn't end up consuming too much time. I have some friends who are very into open source projects, but personally, I don't really care. So even though it might be a value add for me long term, if it's something that I'm not interested in, I'm not going to do it. On that note, if you are someone looking to play the game and you want to learn about other cards, a very easy way to support our channel would be using the links on our site, AskSebby.com, or the ones down below in the description box. My question for you guys is, what are your thoughts on this? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Would love to hear from you guys down below in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. If you know anyone else who'd benefit from what we just talked about, share this with them. It'll probably help them out. But otherwise, hope you guys liked it. See you guys next time.